Good afternoon. Welcome to Words. My name is Ian Gillespie. I'm with the London Free Press, and it's my pleasure and honor to act as moderator for this afternoon's presentation featuring author Terry Fallis. Just in case you wandered in from the market and don't know what's going on, Terry is the author of, and he just informed me, his bio says 4, but now officially 5 best-selling novels. This just hit the bestseller list about 2 weeks ago. Is that right, Terry? All published by McClelland Stewart. His debut novel, The Best Laid Plans, won the 2008 Stephen Leacock Medal for Humour and was crowned the 2011 winner of CBC Canada Reads, and was dubbed, quote, the essential Canadian novel of the decade. Take that, Margaret Atwood. Yeah. In January 2014, CBC aired a 6-part TV miniseries based on The Best Laid Plans. It's also in development as a stage musical by Touchstone Theatre in Vancouver. His next novel, The High Road, was published in September 2010, was a finalist for the 2011 Stephen Leacock Medal for Humour. His third novel, Up and Down, was released in 2012. It debuted on the Globe and Mail bestseller list, was a finalist, have you heard this before, for the 2013 Leacock Medal, and then won the 2013 Ontario Library Association Evergreen Award. Terry's fourth novel, No Relation, hit bookstores in the spring of 2014, opened on the Globe and Mail bestseller list, and won the 2015 Leacock Medal for Humour. So I'm thinking that either nobody else is entering this thing, or you have like incriminating photographs of the judges. Just kidding. Or both. His latest novel, which of course, Poles Apart, it's a wonderful, entertaining, quite insightful read, and we'll be talking about that, was published in October. Is that right? Just a couple weeks ago. And also, he built a hovercraft. I'm not kidding. That's not a joke. That's not, people are, all right. But all those things are just the tip of the iceberg, really, when it comes to Terry. And make no mistake, Terry Fallis is an iceberg. He is exerting a glacial-like presence on Canada, moving, crushing, gouging, flattening everything in his wake. Yeah. Because he also, just a little background, is a pretty fascinating guy, just talking to him now. He graduated with a Bachelor of Engineering from McMaster. That's easy. Where he was president of the student union. After graduation, he turned his back on engineering, or they kicked him out, possibly, and he joined future Prime Minister Jean Chrétien's full-time staff for the 1984 Federal Liberal Leadership Campaign. Served on the political staff of Liberal Minister of State for Youth, the Honourable Jean Laperrière. Stayed with Laperrière as his legislative assistant, following the landslide victory of Brian Mulroney and the Progressive Conservative Party. Do you remember them? No. Returned to Toronto in 1985, worked with Robert Nixon, Treasurer, in the newly elected Liberal Ontario government, led by, thank you, very good, on London's own David Peterson. For nearly 8 years after leaving provincial politics, Terry was a government affairs and communications consultant with the international PR firm Hill and Knowlton. And he later became president of Burger and Associates, a fast food joint in Downsview. Only Terry is laughing at that. That is not true. Burger and Associates is a subsidiary of Knowlton, and it's a big deal, so, okay. In 1995, he co-founded Thornley Fallis with Joe Thornley. It's a communications consulting agency with offices in Ottawa and Toronto. He's no longer a co-owner, but he's still working with that agency, and he has created and co-hosted more than 200 episodes of a popular business podcast, Inside PR. And he built a hovercraft. He's also, for more than 25 years, counseled corporate and government clients on various fronts, including crisis communications, media relations, issues management, marketing communications, public opinion polling, public affairs, stakeholder relations, etc., and has written speeches for CEOs, cabinet ministers, and other community leaders. This is an impressive list of achievements, I think you'd agree. I take some comfort in the fact that clearly this is a vast sort of compensation for some deep, dark, dangerous personality flaw. Because, you know, I get depressed. I read this, I think, what have I done? I mowed my lawn in August. That's it. Nothing. Anyway, Terry is clearly a talented guy with lots to do, and he's going to do a little presentation here for us. So let's sit back and enjoy and welcome, please, Mr. Terry Fallis.
Wow, I don't know where I can go from there. That was great. Thank you, Ian, and thank you for coming in such numbers. I confess we Canadian novelists are somewhat unaccustomed to speaking in front of such large crowds as this. I'm not kidding about that, really. You've outdone yourselves. I'm delighted to be at the festival. What a great lineup they have brought together. And I find the hosts and all the volunteers are just doing an amazing job. So thank you for having me. I'm going to try and get through this quickly so that we can get to the conversation, which may be more interesting. But I thought I might tell you a little bit about this novel and where it comes from. I'm a member in good standing of the Write What You Know School of Writing. You can find pieces of me and pieces of my life strewn about the pages of my novels, not so much as autobiography, but I just find it easier to write if I'm writing about something that I know about, that I care about, that I have experience with. So that's what I've done in virtually all of my novels. In this novel, it is my feminist comic novel, in a staunchly pro-feminist way, I hasten to add. It's narrated by the author of what becomes overnight the world's most famous and popular feminist blog. The blog is called Eve of Equality. It's an anonymous blog. And it becomes famous overnight because in the novel, an Oprah Winfrey-like character, it isn't Oprah, though I should tell you it was when I wrote the first draft of the novel. But it's a different, fictitious Oprah-like character now. But she stumbles upon the blog and loves it, thinks it's thoughtful, erudite, committed, leavened with humor, and very substantive and powerfully written. And she tweets about it and promotes it on her Facebook page and then promotes it on her live show. So overnight, this blog goes from a small little blog to a much bigger blog. And the speculation begins. Who is writing this blog? And everyone assumes that it's a woman named Eve who writes the blog. The central kind of conceit of the story is that it's actually a youngish man named Everett, who is in fact a committed feminist. And the feminist awakening that Everett goes through or experiences at university may be the most autobiographical piece of writing I have ever done. So I know this causes questions. Why feminism? Why would somebody who hails from the most privileged demographic in the history of civilization, the middle-aged white male, why would he write about feminism? And it conjures up all these theories and questions. Number one, a desperate ploy to meet women. A cynical attempt to sell books because we know who buys books in this country, right? Or finally, that it's a blatant opportunism because feminism seems to have returned to the headlines and is now very topical. And if I wait long enough, a final, more distant echo of a theory arrives, and that is, wait a sec, maybe he's actually a feminist. And I'm here to tell you that that's actually what is the case here. You can see my interest in feminism lurking in the undergrowth of my earlier novels, but it is front and center in this novel. So I thought maybe we should just go through briefly the making of a 20-something male feminist, because that's when it happened to me. 1978 to 1984, I went to McMaster University. I was studying engineering, not exactly the great bastion of progressive feminist enlightenment. But when I got through first year and actually passed, I decided in second year I could begin to explore campus life outside of the engineering faculty, and I got heavily involved with student politics. I represented the engineering faculty on the Student Representative Assembly for 4 years. I was Speaker of the Assembly for a year. I was Vice President of the Students' Union for a year, which required me to take a reduced course load, so my stay at McMaster was extended. And finally, when I was in my final year of my engineering degree, I actually ran for President of the Students' Union, somehow hoodwinked the undergraduates of McMaster and squeaked out a victory. And yes, there was a time in the halcyon days of the early 1980s when the center part was in. But working in the Students' Union, being president of the Students' Union, really did change my life in a way that few other events have or has. I was active in the national student movement because when you're the president, you get to go to all the conferences around the country. I served on the executive of the Canadian Federation of Students, and it was a great and eye-opening experience for me. It started in 1980 when I went to my first National Union of Students conference at the University of Lethbridge, went to my first women's issues workshop, met some ardent feminists. The first time I'd met really, truly committed women as part of the women's movement. And this was a new experience for me. And I mean, I grew up in a very traditional family. My father was a surgeon. My mother was a nurse, but when her children were born, she stayed at home, and it was just Ward and June Cleaver as I grew up. But there is a very prominent feminist strand in the student movement, and I got quite wrapped up in it. And I stayed working in the student movement for many years while at McMaster, chairing conferences and things like that, and it was just a great experience. When I was president of the Students' Union in 1983, we brought quite a famous, prominent feminist scholar from the U.S. up. Her name is Jean Kilbourne. Anyone heard of Jean Kilbourne? Oh, Killing Us Softly, thank you. That's right. She had a couple of presentations. She was showing around campuses across North America, Killing Us Softly, and the second one was called The Naked Truth. And we brought her in to do this presentation. I introduced her. And she focuses her feminist lens on advertising and how women are portrayed in advertising. And for an hour and a half, we stood in a lecture theater not unlike this one, packed to the gunnels, and we saw image after image after image of advertising that we'd all seen many times before, and but we could see how women were being portrayed, and to see it sort of in a relentless repetition, it was very, very powerful. I wrote about it in my weekly column that week back in 1983. And I walked out of that room. In a way, it was the culminating event in my feminist awakening, I think. It seemed to bring everything into perspective, because when you can begin to recognize when women are being objectified, and it's not rocket science, I don't know why I wasn't seeing it before, but when you begin to see it, you can't not see it. And I began to see it everywhere I looked, in the books I read, in the movies I saw, in my own behavior, in the behavior of my friends. I saw it in my family. I saw it everywhere. And in a way, in that moment, the penny dropped, the light bulb came on, and my eyes opened. Bet you didn't know PowerPoint could do that, did you? Let's just do that again. There you go. That only took me about 9 hours to get, but no. But it is true. I became galvanized, and as an engineer, I like to think I think logically. And for me, when you're in the student movement, there are 45 different social causes the student movement is concerned about, from illegal arms purchases in Iran and in Central America, to government underfunding of universities, to animal health and that sort of thing. But to me, the big one is gender inequality, because there are 7.3 billion people in the world, and gender inequality affects 3.65 billion of them, half the population, because there is not a place on earth, there's not a city, a town, a school, an institution, an organization, a town, a city, a province where there is not some form of gender discrimination. Sometimes it is mild, and other times it is absolutely horrific, but it exists everywhere. And to me, that was the big one, and that was the one I wanted to get involved in. So I became branded a feminist on campus. And yes, there was a time in the halcyon days of the early 1980s when the pale yellow sweater vest was fashionable. It was quite something to be called a feminist then. It was one thing to be a woman and to be called a feminist. It was quite another to be a man and called a feminist. And let us just for a moment reclaim the word feminist. There seems to be a backlash against the word right now. There are websites springing up. One of them is IamNotAFeminist.com. And I cannot understand it, because I'm not going to ask how many in the room consider themselves to be feminist, because I hope in a moment every hand will go up. If you look up the definition of the word feminist, this is what it says: one who believes that women should have the same rights and opportunities as men. It is not a deeply diabolical, anti-men, man-hating conspiracy for women's supremacy. That is not what feminism is. It just means those who believe that women ought to have the same rights and privileges and opportunities as men. So I hope that everyone on earth under this definition would be happy to declare themselves a feminist. And that's what I consider myself to be. And as I do when I get interested in something, my parents used to say when I was growing up, "Oh, Terry's on another kick." Because I would get interested in something, and then I would go and bring 14 books home from the library and read my way through that topic area, and 3 weeks later, maybe my interest had diminished, but I still had this store of knowledge of it. My interest in this topic has not diminished, but back in the early 80s, I read through the great feminist writers. This is just a smattering of them, but Kate Millett and Catherine McKinnon and Gloria Steinem and Andrea Dworkin and Germaine Greer, and my friend Michelle Landsberg, who wrote a wonderful book called Women and Children First, which is one of the first feminist books I read. I remember thinking at the time, if every man read that book in the world, we probably wouldn't have a problem anymore, as naive as that thought was. But it was a great thrill for me when Michelle Landsberg read the manuscript for Poles Apart and blessed the back cover with a positive blurb. So I feel like I passed the test when she thought the book was okay. And Judy Rebeck as well from the National Action Committee on the Status of Women. So this is what I do. I read through all these books, and since the early 1980s, this has been an important issue to me. Back then, there was another phrase that was moving around campuses. You may have heard it, the personal is political. I don't know how current it is in this day and age, but it really means that it's one thing to be a feminist in principle, it's quite another to be one in practice, and to try and incorporate those beliefs into your everyday life. And I thought that was important. And one of the first times this came to the fore was when I walked as president of the Students' Union, I walked into the convenience store we ran on campus called the Bread Bin, and we sell greeting cards there. And there was a greeting card there that was the absolute embodiment of objectification of women. It compartmentalized a woman's body. I'll give you a quick glimpse of the card in a moment. But I walked in, I pulled it off the shelf, and I gave it to the manager and said, "We can't have this for sale here." And he got quite angry about it and went to the campus media, and it became an issue that I was throwing my weight around as president of the Students' Union. What I love is in the article it says, "Fallis, an admitted feminist." It's like being an admitted arsonist or something like that. But I'll give you a quick glimpse of the photo of the card. There it is. So you can see why I was not happy with it. Perhaps the funniest part, if there's anything funny about this incident at all, it's that the representative of the greeting card company who refused comment, but they named him in the article, his name is Richard Bottomley. Like, if I'd written that in a novel, my editor would have said, "You can't call him Bottomley." You can't make this stuff up. In 1987, just 3 days before I was married, I was in Wolfville, Nova Scotia. My wife and I were doing final arrangements, or my fiancé then, I guess you could say. And I walked into a bookstore I visit whenever I go to Wolfville, which is as often as I can. And I picked up a copy of a first edition of John Stuart Mill's The Subjection of Women, which is a wonderful tome. Those of you who may have started Poles Apart already may realize or know that this book figures in the story. This has been a cherished volume of mine. I just thought, I think it's the epigraph, if that's what you call this opening line. I'm just going to read you. This is part of the first paragraph of that novel. He says that the principle which regulates the existing social relations between the two sexes, the legal subordination of one sex to the other, is wrong in itself and now one of the chief hindrances to human improvement, and that it ought to be replaced by a principle of perfect equality, admitting no power or privilege on the one side, nor disability on the other. It's a wonderful paragraph that sums up, though it's written in 1869, the problem that exists even to this day. So life goes on. I got a job, left politics, got a job, and I served on the board of Planned Parenthood of Toronto for 6 years. I took my first and only creative writing course at the University of Toronto, where I now teach in the creative writing program. And I wrote 2 feminist short stories that were extraordinarily serious and earnest, and there was no humor in them whatsoever. I clearly had not found my voice. I also marched in all sorts of, every year in the International Women's Day March, we would march. And over the years, I have come to realize that marching is easy. Marching is very easy. Sitting on boards is quite easy. What is more difficult and is a day-to-day challenge is living your life on a daily basis free from the shackles of gender stereotyping that society has imposed on us for thousands of years. So marching is easy. So we've tried to live our lives, my wife and I and our kids, in that true spirit of equality. And it's not easy because we continue to be assaulted daily by different images of the roles of men and the roles of women. Let me just touch on the book briefly, then I'll read the first 6 chapters. No, I won't do that. I'll read a little piece. But the novel, it features a fractured family. There is a father who has a stroke. There is a love story buried in here. There is a sort of a oleaginous, very nefarious business mogul who starts a chain of high-end men's clubs. There is an aging, fictitious feminist icon who I placed as one of the women in the cabal around Gloria Steinem when she started Ms. magazine. It's not a true character, but I like to think she's a composite of many of those women. There are plenty of strong women in the story. There's a CEO who is the narrator's mother. There's a lawyer. There is a dancer, an exotic dancer. There's this anonymous blog, and yes, there is a poll. Maybe I'll just leave that there. The podcast started, I podcast all my novels, that's the audio version of the novel, chapter by chapter, and give them away for free on iTunes. All of my novels are there. I have just posted earlier this week chapter 15 of Poles Apart. The final chapter will go up next week. So if you'd rather listen to a novel than read it, or if you suffer with insomnia, I may be able to help you on that. So why don't I read a piece of the novel, and then we can chat. How are we doing on time? Okay? Oh, geez. It's going fast. I'll read this quickly. Let me just set this up. It'll take 20 minutes to set up. No. It's from the middle of the novel. Everett, the blogger, still no one knows he's the blogger. He lives in an apartment above a high-end men's club, believe it or not, totally coincidentally. And he has befriended one of the beautiful, stunningly beautiful, very tall, shapely women dancers named Shauna Hawkins. And and she's a PhD candidate in women's studies, studying the history of burlesque through a feminist lens. And she started dancing there for research and has stayed because of the money. She has a 4-year-old daughter named Chloe, for whom Everett is babysitting that night because Shauna's mother is sick. So you got the scene. She's dancing, he's upstairs, Chloe's fallen asleep on the couch, and he is trying to write a blog post. I must have fallen asleep. I realized that when something woke me up. I could see on my laptop screen that my forehead had typed several lines of gibberish as I nodded off. I'd rubbernecked all the way down to the keyboard. Then I heard the noise again. It was a man and woman arguing in the alley below. I looked out the window and saw a shiny Lexus with the driver's door open. The man, about my age, maybe a bit taller, and wearing a gray suit, was standing a few yards away with his right arm outstretched. In his hand, he held the hand of Shauna Hawkins, who clearly did not want her hand held. She was trying to pull it out of his grip without success. I opened my door and stepped out on the fire escape, but hesitated. What was I going to do? "Get your little ass in the car," he snapped at her. "You knew how this was going to end when you gave me that look back in there. Don't back out now." "If you value your ability to procreate, you'll let go of my hand right now," she said in a low and slow voice. "Hey," I shouted. Apparently I wasn't hesitating anymore. I tore down the stairs and within about 3 seconds was standing between them, though their hands were still linked. "It's okay, Everett. I can handle this jerk." "I've got this, Shauna," I said in my Power Ranger voice. Before turning to the jerk, "Let go of her hand right now, get in your car, and leave." "Shut up and mind your own business." I'm excising some profanities here for the more tender ears. "This is between me and her, so blow." "Seriously, Everett, I can clean this up on my own, but thanks." "Listen to the Amazon, little man. This doesn't concern you." I kind of lost it then, as happens often in those rare fight or flight moments, at least according to psychologists. I turned toward the jerk, holding my hands up in a rather unusual claw-like configuration I made up on the spot. I imagine it looked like a cross between the talons of a large bird of prey and chronic arthritis. "Look, jackass, I've been waiting a long time for this. 10 years of Tsingtao training and 2 years as an instructor, and not once have I been able to use this in a real-life situation on someone who really deserves it. Not once. Until right now. Your number just came up. Please don't disappoint me. Let's do this." His expression changed, only slightly, but enough to let me know he was rethinking his options. "So let's go," I pushed, bouncing up and down on the balls of my feet, waving my talons around in intricate patterns. There are 100 different moves in my Tsingtao repertoire, and they all lead to pain. Some of them yield blood, and 2 of them have been known to cause paralysis. So what do you want first? It's up to you. Extremities, head, face, or midsection. Your choice. I moved a little closer to him, jerking my head forward toward him and feigning right and then left, still with my claw hand slicing through the air in ways even I couldn't predict. He blinked, or rather he let go of Shauna's hand. Then he smirked, the last refuge of the humiliated bully. I just made that up, but I like how it sounds. "Yeah, well, screw you and your pansy martial arts too," he sneered as he slipped back into his car and slammed the door. I stepped forward, now that it was safe, and smacked my hand hard onto the car roof. It made a very loud noise and hurt my hand so much my eyes watered. He gave me the finger and squealed out of the alley. I took Shauna's elbow and led her up the fire escape to my still open kitchen door. "Are you all right? Did he hurt you?" "Everett, I'm fine. I had the situation completely under control. I didn't need a Bruce Lee intervention." I confess this caught me a little by surprise. Where was the gratitude, the fawning over my bravery, the marveling at my take-charge resolution of a potentially dangerous situation? "Shauna, I looked out my kitchen window and I see this guy, this jerk, trying to kidnap you. I kind of just acted on instinct." We stood facing each other. Well, I came up to her neck. She was still in full makeup. The pure beauty of her face very nearly took my breath away, which was quite an achievement, as I was already hyperventilating from the alley altercation. Then, without warning, I started to tremble uncontrollably. Out of nowhere, my body was behaving as if I were standing on the shore of the Arctic Ocean in nothing but a Speedo. "Everett, what's wrong? You're shaking like a leaf." I'm aware of that." She took hold of me and tried to stop my shaking by squeezing me in a bear hug. "You're scared?" It's all over now. The time to be frightened was about 3 minutes ago. You're a little late. Well, I think it's some kind of delayed reaction to the trauma, I said, my teeth chattering. I wouldn't exactly call it fear. Perhaps it's early onset Parkinson's, or maybe it's just nervous energy since I didn't have to fight the guy. She wasn't buying it. My trembling calmed down a bit. She rubbed my back. But you have 10 years of training in Sing Tao. You're a Sing Tao instructor. That jackass was terrified of you. You could see the fear in his eyes. It looked kind of like what's in your eyes now. Sing Tao is a chicken dish I ordered from that Chinese restaurant down the street. I confessed in a voice so sheepish it had fleece. I don't know how that slipped by the editor. Wow. I know, Everett. I order it too. It's so good, but not good for you. You knew I was bluffing the whole time? Well, I liked the gnarled, wavy hand action you added. That made it seem all the more authentic. Everett, it was sweet of you to come to my rescue, but I really did have it under control, though it might not have seemed it at the time. I really thought he was going to do something to you, and you thought you'd charge in on your white steed and save me. No, not really. Maybe. And if matters had escalated, well, I'm bigger than you, sweet Everett, and bigger than the jerk and the Lexus. I probably could have taken the both of you. And I don't even have your deep knowledge of the ancient and sacred martial art of Sing Tao. Okay, so maybe I didn't think it through. Maybe I was just running on adrenaline and instinct. And millions of years of gender stereotyping. Ouch, that hurt. She hugged me a little tighter. I mean it. It was sweet and brave of you to step in between us like that. I knew you were doing what you thought was right. You were trying to protect me. I'm grateful for that. You put yourself out there for me. You were kind and courageous, and I love you for it, she said, in a quiet, intoxicating voice. I thought I detected a subtle change in her tone. She leaned forward, face on to me, and looked in my eyes, her hands holding my upper arms. Then it seemed to me that she started to move in. Based on millions of years of highly developed, acutely sensitive male instinct, I moved in too. I closed my eyes and configured my lips in what I thought would be the most enticing position. I then felt my lips press up against her, against something that didn't feel much like her lips. I opened my eyes and saw that I was in the act of kissing the palm of her right hand. I liked her hands, but I wasn't expecting that. With lightning speed, she had thrust her hand up between our faces. As a talented dancer, she clearly has extraordinary powers of physical coordination and kinesthetic awareness. There was not much room or time to complete that particular maneuver without her fingers winding up in my nostrils. But she somehow pulled it off. Sorry, I'm pretty sure that was my fault, Shauna said. I thought you knew. Thought I knew what? That you might be into palm kissing? She laughed. She had a really nice laugh. No, that I bat for the other team, all the way, 100% of the time, no exceptions, always have. I must have looked as puzzled as I felt. I'm gay, I'm a lesbian. I'm sure you've heard of us. You know, the island of Lesbos, Ellen DeGeneres, Melissa Etheridge, Martina Navratilova, to name just a few of the tribe. Apparently, I still looked befuddled. Come on, Everett, you have to lose the crew-cut, chunky, no-makeup women's prison stereotype you're carrying around with you. We come in all shapes and sizes. I know that. I just misread the situation. It happens. I swear I had no idea you hailed from the island of Lesbos. Besides, Chloe reported that you liked kissing. Well, that's because I kiss her all the time. I can't help it. My eyes darted over to Chloe again and then back to Shauna. I must have still been displaying my puzzled look. I assume you've heard of turkey basters, she said. You impregnated yourself with a turkey baster? Of course not. It's a metaphor. I had artificial insemination in a real clinic. No turkeys were harmed in the making of this sweet child. She said, stroking Chloe's back next to us. And the father, did you know him? I only know him as 780-2478, which is my student number at McMaster, by the way. I knew it would come in handy one day. He was an anonymous donor, and that's just fine with me. We just stared at Chloe, who seemed she could sleep through. We stared at Chloe, who seemed could sleep through a Metallica concert. She really is amazing, I said. Yes, she is, but so are you. I loved the story you told her. It was perfect. I dusted off my perplexed look for about the fourth time in the preceding 10 minutes. She merely pointed to the baby monitor still on the coffee table, its red light glowing. Oh, shit, I forgot about that. Just give me a moment to review everything I said in the last 5 hours. You said all the right things. She gathered up all the paraphernalia that comes with being the mother of a beautiful 4-year-old girl and stowed it in the canvas bag. I walked them to her car. Shauna carried the big blue bag, and I carried Chloe. Still sound asleep, she was pure, warm weight against my chest and shoulders. Her head fit perfectly against my neck. I could feel her breath on my skin. I slid her into her car seat, and Shauna buckled the straps. Still, Chloe slept. Thank you for everything you did for me tonight, and I mean everything, she said, kissing my cheek. If only you had breasts, this could have been a magical night. Well, at this precise moment, believe me, I wish I had breasts too. She laughed, slid into her car, and pulled away. Thank you.
Hello? Hello?
Hello.
Okay. I know we don't have a lot of time, and you sort of, there's so much in this book. You covered the sort of feminist aspect there. I just want to ask, this is such a uniformly, and I'll say humorous, funny, entertaining read. I just have and there's a quote here. I think, I'm getting to the point that I think humor is underrated and undervalued. I have a quote here from the American writer Billy Collins, who said, "There's something very authentic about humor. Anybody can pretend to be serious, but you can't pretend to be funny." And I think that's very true. To pull it off, and so here's my sort of mini thesis, and you can defend it or refute it or not, but I tend to think that humor is the sort of Rodney Dangerfield of literature, and that it don't get no respect. So the question is, do you think that because, and I hope it's not unfair to think of you as primarily a humor writer, that perhaps the work then sometimes doesn't get the attention it deserves, or?
Well, I think that's been common for a long time in most literary markets, whether in Canada or the United States. Almost by definition, if it's funny, it can't be serious, therefore it shouldn't be treated seriously, when in fact I think humor is very serious business and can be dealing with very, very serious issues. And if it's wielded effectively, I think it can be a very trenchant instrument of social comment. But we don't resort to it often enough, I don't think. I think we need more humor writing. And I don't ever expect, for other reasons beyond the fact that my books may be funny, I mean, my books will never be on the Giller Prize list, but not because they're funny, I think because other writers' sentences are far superior to mine, I think. But there is that belief that it doesn't really get a fair shake because we're making people laugh. It's light and fluffy, when in fact you can make people laugh and still have it be serious, and you hope causing them to think about something.
Just sticking with the humor for one more second. The other thing that impressed me about this book is that I know many of the humor writers that I admire, whether it's James Thurber, or Nora Ephron, Robert Benchley, Woody Allen, a lot of their pieces were short pieces, 500 to 2,000 words, sort of mini essays. And I think it's very difficult to maintain that tone. And I think humor is not jokes, it's tone, as you do in this 400-plus page novel.
Well, that's nice, although I think there are plenty of people who think it ought to have been shorter. Well, it's funny, I tend to write in my own voice. That's my little writerly secret. You can read all 5 of my novels, within which there are 4 different narrators. I write in the first person. And even though there are 4 different narrators, they all sound remarkably alike, and they all sound remarkably like me. And that's a sound observation to which I plead guilty. I just find it easier to write when I'm in my own voice. So when I'm writing, it's maybe not as hard to sustain it because it's the same lines I'd be using at the dinner table with my wife and kids as I would be putting in the novel. So it may be easier for me to sustain.
The other interesting thing, and you alluded to it in your presentation somewhat, is that you've really kind of been very active on social media, and I just wanted to touch on that, in that your first book, Best Laid Plans, started as a self-published novel, right? And then you, promoting it, I believe, right, through social media, were able to snag McClelland Stewart as a publisher. So I just wondered if you could describe briefly that journey
Sure.
that you took.
Sure. Actually, it was slightly reversed. I podcast the novel first before it was ever self-published. I was just trying to build an audience for it. I had spent a year trying to find an agent and publisher, and which that whole effort, assiduous as it was, had resulted in exactly 0 rejection letters. I didn't even make a big enough impression on the traditional publishing establishment to generate an automated rejection letter.
You didn't even get a rejection letter?
No. So, you hear those
That's kind
stories.
of the definition of failure, right?
I know,
there,
exactly. Thank you. I can fail with the best of them. I had this blank wall ready for and it's still blank. So I decided I would self-publish it, but while I was going through that process, I decided to build an audience for it, at least try to, by podcasting the novel. And I was already a podcaster, so I knew how to do that. It was really the comments I got from people all over the world, which was the great shock, that made me think that perhaps I had actually written a novel, because I didn't really know whether I'd been successful. And they were so supportive, and the comments were so gratifying, that I self-published it, and my life as a writer changed instantly when, with the last 10 copies I had, I entered my own book into the Leacock Medal, and miraculously the self-published novel won. And within a week of being shortlisted, I landed a literary agent. Within a week of winning, we signed with McClelland Stewart, where I have been happily ever since. So it's sort of a charmed literary journey, and I pinch myself every 20 minutes or so.
I know, again, we're probably running short. Do we want to turn it over? Are there some questions from the audience here?
Settle down. There's time for everybody. Just calm down.
I can run the microphone out, or if you... Yes, sir.
This is sort of a thing on the voice. Do you recommend people meet the author to hear his voice, so when they read the book, they also hear that voice?
Did everyone hear that question? Yeah. Okay. Interesting. I never really thought about that. I think it's, well, I'm not sure. Russell Smith is going to be here later on to speak, and he comes from a different school of thinking. He thinks that there ought not to be biographies on the back flap of books, that it's a piece of art that stands in isolation on its own and deserves to be judged without any knowledge of who wrote it and whether he or she has children and lives in Edmonton and I, on the other hand, I love to know more about the author. I've been in here for many of the sessions the last couple of days because I want to hear more about these people. So I find it useful to hear them in their own voice. So maybe that's a good idea. Come and hear the author speak. I was scared to do that with John Irving, my favorite author, because I worried that he would sort of ruin my my impression of him. But I went anyway, and he did not disappoint. I loved him. So. The microphone is roving. We have a mercy question here.
It is not a mercy question. First off, I want to publicly thank you for teaching me pretty much everything I know about Canadian politics. It was painless, it was fun, and you created some of the people that I really wish existed. I want to know who you read to laugh.
Who I read to laugh. Well, thank you for that first comment. I'm heartened to know that that the book was enjoyed, but also that you learned something from it too, because it was intended to be not an inaccurate portrayal of how we practice politics in this country. It may have been torqued on the edges a little bit for comedic effect, but it really is how politics work. So thank you. Who do I read for fun? I have a lot of comic writers that I've enjoyed over the years. You might not classify Robertson Davies as a really comic writer, but he certainly writes with a wry sense of humor, and he knows how to assemble sentences beautifully. Mordecai Richler, Paul Quarrington, Christopher Buckley in the U.S., who's a great satirist. I've enjoyed Stephen Fry's novels. You may know of Stephen Fry mainly as a television personality, but he is a public intellectual of the first order and has written several very, very good novels, particularly his earlier ones. But John Irving is a particular favorite of mine as well. And Miriam Toews. Miriam Toews and John Irving taught me they're two of my mentors. Neither of them knows that. But the power of juxtaposing humor and pathos, and sometimes rubbing them up right against one another. And if you were here for the Miriam Taves session, that question came up to her. Anyway, those are a few of them.
In Up and Down, there's a delightful portrayal of a certain segment of corporate America. I'm wondering whether there has been any American reviewer who has responded to it.
Did everyone hear that question about Up and Down? There's some Canada-U.S. relations and some stereotyping of both, perhaps, in that novel, which I had a lot of fun with. The novel, I don't have a publishing deal in the U.S. I have a distribution deal, which is not as good and not the same, but they are available down there. I don't think Up and Down is blowing the doors off of Barnes & Noble, but it sold better than I think Random House expected that it would. But it does take a few shots at the Americans. You're quite right. So I kind of keep one eye looking behind me when I'm down there. But
I can't discuss your novels because I must admit I haven't read any of them, but I'm sure I'll change that. I was really interested in your biography and your start in life and politics and that. So could you just talk a little bit about how you find the portrayal of women now in the 21st century compared to where you got your start in the 20th century? Has it improved or gotten worse, or some thoughts on that?
well, I think the status of women has improved, but perhaps not as far as we would like it to have. And you just have to turn on the television and watch some commercials on TV to know that we may have taken 3 steps forward and 2 steps back. There have been great advances in legislation. It is now against the law to do certain things, like pay women less for the work of the same value. The problem is legislation is too often seen as an end instead of just a means to an end. And legislation can never be the end because we'll never have true equality unless we actually have changed our attitudes and our minds, and that we think differently about it, and we no longer have these little assumptions in our head over which we seem to have virtually no control. So we have come a great distance, but there is a long way to go, I think. And I think it's a generational thing. We need the new generation, young people, before they have been inundated with the baggage, the gender stereotyping baggage that we carry with us as adults, and to let them move forward liberated from that, as difficult as that is, because you just have to go into a toy store to see that gender stereotyping remains strong even at that level. So I think we have made some progress, but there is no time for resting on our laurels. More needs to be done. And men need to get more engaged in it, because men are the ones who will end up surrendering power if we are to have true equality. And we need to get comfortable with that and recognize that that will be better for society when that happens, because I think it will. But let's not end on that note, shall we?
Well, just a follow-up question. How do we get young men invested and buying into the notion that, identifying as feminists? And I think some of it has to do with our work as men, mentoring. But I'm just interested in your thoughts about how we get young men starting to think this way.
Yeah, that's a really good question, and one of the great challenges we have. We do need male role models, particularly fathers of sons. We need teachers in schools. We need young adult literature and children's stories. All of that can play a role in erasing what has gone on before, I think. It's very hard. We tried to raise our kids in a completely gender-neutral household. And it's very hard to do because eventually they're going to turn on the television. Eventually they're going to turn on the iPad. And it's funny, we've never had a gun in our house from the time the kids were born upwards. And yet when they go out into the backyard to play, they're 23 and 20. They haven't been doing this for several weeks now. But when they were little kids, like there was nothing in our house anywhere near a gun. They would go out and they'd be shooting each other with sticks before you could, before you know it. So I am loath. Yes, they were. I am loath to suggest that there might be something in the DNA. I refuse to accept that. But it is discouraging when you take young girls and young boys into a room filled with toys, and within 5 seconds, the boys are vroom-vrooming the Hot Wheels around the carpet, and the young girls are playing with the dolls. And that can't be in their heads. It must be from outside, as far as I'm concerned. So we need to try and ameliorate those outside factors that are shaping how they think. And it starts, I think it does start at home, because I think probably we as parents could be doing better jobs at that. And it's important, because if this generation doesn't learn it, we're a whole generation away from making the kind of progress that we need to. And so you've hit upon, I think, one of the great challenges we face, and parents shoulder a heavy burden in that sense, I think.
In your book, Up and Down, your hero is not only a woman, but a woman of a certain age. Will you be writing more about that sort of ageism and discrimination we see?
Yes, did everyone hear the question? I really like writing about older women. I think they've been seriously neglected in literature in general, and perhaps in Canadian literature in particular. And the urge to write more about older women came as a consequence of my first two novels, where I have a woman named Muriel Parkinson, who is an aging political icon, certainly a titan in the local community, and I wanted to write more about them. So that's where Up and Down came from, and the character of Landon Percival, who's 71 years old, and I hope the star of the story. I hope you'll be pleased that in Poles Apart, there is I mentioned her earlier, the aging feminist icon whose name in the novel is Beverly Tanner. So there is an older woman who plays a very important role in this novel as well. So I imagine I will always have an older woman somewhere in the story, just because there are older women in my life and in all of our lives, and they ought to take their rightful place in the pages of our literature, I think. That is, if you consider this literature. The pages of our books.
Maybe I'll just wrap it up. I think this is pithy and apropos. This is a quote from the book. It's the character you just referred to, Beverly Tanner, who is a feminist activist that your protagonist, Everett Kane, encounters while his father is recovering from a stroke. And she says at one point, "I always believed humor could be a trenchant instrument of change, even social change, if wielded carefully. But most of the activists around me thought it would trivialize what was a very serious issue." And I think the wonder of this book is that you've managed to combine social commentary and humor so well. Congratulations on that. And so that's it. Thank you all for attending. Please, Poles Apart, Terry Fallis.